It all started with a smirk. The kind of smirk that drips with certainty, the kind you only wear when you believe, without a shadow of doubt, that the person sitting across from you is beneath you. That was the look Judge Judy gave John Kennedy as he quietly adjusted the microphone in front of him, the studio lights reflecting off his silver-framed glasses. She didn't know who he really was. Not yet. To her, he was just another guest defendant on a special televised courtroom episode designed more for entertainment than justice, a novelty segment where real people debated hypothetical cases. But from the moment she opened her mouth, from the second she barked her first line across the room, "Do you even understand what contract law is, sir?" you could feel the temperature in the studio drop. And John? He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He just offered a small, polite smile, the kind a seasoned warrior gives when he sees the first move in a very long game. The case was a fabricated scenario involving a broken verbal agreement, a setup designed for debate. The producers wanted drama, and Judge Judy was more than happy to deliver. She leaned forward, her voice sharp, commanding, slicing through the air with practiced authority. "Sir, this isn't the time for storytelling. Just answer the question directly, or I'll hold you in contempt for wasting my time." The audience chuckled. Kennedy didn't. Instead, he took a calm breath, his southern drawl smooth but resolute as he responded, "Ma'am, I'm simply trying to clarify the context. Law without context is noise. That's when it happened." Judy rolled her eyes. "Oh, please," she snapped. "Spare me the philosophical nonsense. You're not in a lecture hall. You're in my court." The crowd laughed again, louder this time, and in that moment you could see it. That familiar flicker in the eyes of a man who's been underestimated his whole life. Not because he lacked strength, but because he carried it so quietly. What they didn't know, what she didn't know, was that the very legal clause they were dissecting on stage, he wrote it, word for word, in a legislative session 15 years earlier. But he didn't interrupt her. Not yet. He let her build the fire, let her lean into her performance. Because John Kennedy understood something most people never learn. Sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. Judge Judy, sensing weakness, pounced. "You've clearly never studied law. That clause doesn't mean what you think it means. It's basic, it's obvious, it's embarrassing." She turned to the camera, chuckling with mock sympathy. "Folks, this is why we need civics back in schools." Gasps, laughter, a smattering of applause. John's fingers remained lightly folded. He wasn't rattled, he was ready. He leaned into the mic, voice steady as glass. "Judge, may I show you something?" She raised an eyebrow. "You may not. We're done here." But the producers were already waving from offstage. Something about his presence, his quiet control, was magnetic. They gave him the floor. Slowly, deliberately, John reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin, leather-bound document. It wasn't a legal brief. It was a Senate bill, one bearing his name, one containing the exact clause Judge Judy had just spent 10 minutes ridiculing. He slid it across the podium toward her. The camera zoomed in. The audience went silent. Her hand hovered over it, unsure. "What is this?" she asked, suddenly less sharp. "That," he said, "is the original legislative draft of Public Accountability Act 2413, co-authored by myself in 2008, which, if you flip to page 5, contains the clause you just quoted." Her hand trembled as she turned the page. There it was. The words, verbatim. Her face didn't fall immediately, but her voice did. For the first time all evening, she was speechless. And in that suspended silence, you could almost hear the truth echoing across every viewer's living room. that the man she mocked was not just a scholar, not just a gentleman, but the author of the law itself. If you've ever seen someone realize, too late, that they picked a fight with the wrong person, then you know the look she gave him next. And if you felt even a fraction of justice in that moment, go ahead and like this video and drop a 9 in the comments. Because things were about to get even more unbelievable. Judge Judy's fingers hovered over the page like they were touching something radioactive. She blinked once, then again, slower this time, as if reading the clause under bright studio lights would somehow change what it said. The words weren't just familiar. They were identical to the ones she'd just spent the past 10 minutes mocking. The same clause she'd called embarrassing, basic, and misunderstood had his name, John Neely Kennedy, etched into the legislative margins, right next to the timestamp from the Senate Judiciary Committee. The audience shifted in their seats. The energy in the room had flipped. You could feel it. Like the moment when the magician's trick is revealed, and suddenly, the audience isn't laughing. They're staring. Judge Judy straightened in her chair, but not like a judge reestablishing order. More like a performer realizing the script had been ripped in half. "Why didn't you say who you were?" she asked, her tone noticeably less venomous. Kennedy raised his eyebrows slightly, that quiet smile still resting on his face. "Because it shouldn't matter," he said. "Titles don't make the truth stronger, but the truth always makes titles matter." It wasn't a mic drop, but it felt like one. The audience didn't cheer, not yet. They were too stunned, too busy replaying every sarcastic jab she had hurled at him just minutes before. Then, from the back row, a woman's voice broke the silence. "Is that really him?" she whispered, just loud enough to catch the mic. "That's the senator, isn't it?" Phones started rising. Whispers turned into murmurs. The internet was already 5 steps ahead. Clips were being trimmed in real time, captions added, TikToks stitched with the caption, "When you realize you just humiliated the man who wrote the law you're quoting." But Judy wasn't ready to surrender. She was too proud, too seasoned, too on camera. "This doesn't change the fact that your interpretation was off," she fired back, clinging to authority like a lifeline. "Being part of the legislature doesn't make you the arbiter of intent." Kennedy nodded gently, not flinching. "That's true," he replied, his voice even. "But the Supreme Court tends to refer to authorial intent when interpreting legislative text. And if you'd allowed me to finish earlier, I could have shared not just my understanding, but the actual committee notes and floor discussions behind this clause." He opened the document to a tabbed section labeled Debate Transcript Subsection C. It wasn't just thorough, it was airtight. That's when the energy in the room shifted again, but this time, permanently. You could hear someone in the production booth whisper, "Oh my God," and a second camera panned in on Judge Judy's face. Her expression wasn't anger anymore. It was something else. Something rawer. Disbelief, maybe. Embarrassment wrapped in denial. And just when it seemed like she might pivot, recover, own the moment with a touch of humility, she doubled down. "You think being a senator makes you untouchable?" she snapped. "You think you can just walk in here and make a mockery of my court?" The words hung in the air like a threat, but they were hollow. Everyone knew it. Kennedy didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply said, "No, ma'am. But belittling someone without knowing who they are, that makes a mockery of the bench." It hit like a punch to the soul. Audible gasps echoed. A man in the second row let out a slow whistle. You could see the exact second the crowd switched sides. And then, twist number 2, a member of the show's production crew stepped onto the set, whispering something into Judy's ear. Her face stiffened. She looked down. The crew member handed her a tablet. The screen displayed a live feed of Twitter exploding, #Judy versus Kennedy trending worldwide. Over 200,000 mentions in less than 10 minutes. Videos from audience members had already gone viral. People weren't just watching, they were dissecting, quoting, reacting. Judge Judy set the tablet down with a trembling hand. For a moment, she looked human, vulnerable even. She turned toward Kennedy, and the fire in her eyes was no longer defiance. It was the flicker of someone who realized they had just been outclassed on their own stage. "You came here to teach me a lesson?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Kennedy shook his head. "No," he said. "I came here to listen. You chose to lecture." And in that pause, that aching silence between two people who had both spent their lives in positions of authority, something powerful settled into the room. A shift. The crowd no longer saw a TV judge and a guest. They saw something deeper. A cultural moment unfolding live. And trust me, what happened next? You won't believe who stood up from the back row and took the mic. Keep watching. From the back of the studio, a voice rang out, clear, sharp, and unmistakably familiar. "Excuse me, but I think we need to set the record straight." Heads turned in unison, cameras swiveled. Even Judge Judy froze for a beat, as if her ears had deceived her. But there was no mistake. Standing just beyond the risers was Professor Marion Blake, a decorated legal scholar from Yale Law School and a recurring expert on several televised law programs, including this one. She wasn't scheduled to appear. She wasn't even supposed to be in the building. But she had been invited to observe that day's recording, and she had seen enough. She walked to the edge of the set, mic already clipped, camera operators following like gravity itself had shifted direction. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Professor Blake said, her tone polite but resolute. "But as someone who teaches the very statute you've been debating, I feel obligated to clarify something." Judge Judy tried to recover her composure, waving off the intrusion. "This is a closed courtroom, Professor," she began, but Blake raised a hand gently and said, "Then I'll speak to the audience. The public, that was the cue the producers needed." Within seconds, a chair was set for her on stage. John Kennedy didn't move. He simply turned slightly, offering a respectful nod. Professor Blake returned it, then faced the audience. "The clause in question, the one this entire case revolves around, has been cited in over 70 lower court decisions since 2009, and in almost every one of those rulings, judges have referred back to the original legislative record, including the notes and commentary provided by Senator John Kennedy himself." The silence was deafening. Judge Judy's lips tightened, her posture stiff, but the damage was done. Then came the third twist. Professor Blake opened her own folder and pulled out a highlighted academic journal article. "In fact," she continued, "I wrote this piece 5 years ago on statutory ambiguity. The key example I used to illustrate clarity and legislative intent was, yes, you guessed it, this clause, and I credited Senator Kennedy's original draft and reasoning as the gold standard of clarity." She placed the article on the bench. "I believe it's still used in your own show's legal prep notes." There was a visible flinch on Judge Judy's face. At this point, the audience could hardly contain themselves. Whispers surged like electricity. Phones were out. Hashtags multiplied in real time. # Judge outjudged, # Kennedy clapback, # Justice live. One producer backstage mouthed to another, "This is going to be the biggest episode we've ever aired." But Kennedy wasn't celebrating. He hadn't come to win. He wasn't there for revenge. He had simply come to speak the truth, and that truth had done all the work for him. Still, there was one more card to play. Because what no one else on that stage realized, yet, was that Kennedy had already turned this experience into something far bigger than a courtroom drama. He turned slowly toward Judge Judy, his expression calm but full of weight. I wasn't going to say this publicly, he said, but I've spent the last 2 years working on a civic education initiative in rural communities, one that's meant to bridge the gap between everyday Americans and the legal systems that affect them. This case, this moment, it won't just be a trending clip. It'll be part of our next curriculum module. We're using this footage to teach humility, restraint, and the importance of knowing before judging. The crowd erupted, not in laughter or mockery, but in applause. Loud, extended, almost cathartic. It was the sound of vindication not just for Kennedy, but for every viewer who had ever been dismissed or underestimated. Judge Judy didn't respond right away. She looked at Kennedy, then Professor Blake, then back to the room full of eyes now questioning her role, not as a performer, but as a figure of justice. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her gavel. She didn't bang it. She simply placed it down, carefully, as if even its weight now felt different. Kennedy offered a final line, not a jab, not a boast, just a quiet truth. Sometimes we're invited into places to be humiliated, but when you stand in the truth, no one can strip you of your dignity. His voice was gentle, but it carried. The applause rose again, stronger this time, as if the room itself needed to exhale. And just when you thought the moment had peaked, when it felt like everything had been said and done, someone from the audience stood up with tears in her eyes, holding a letter. Her story would change everything again. But we'll get to that in a minute. You might want to sit down for this. She was barely 5 feet tall, but the moment she stood, the entire room quieted as if gravity itself had paused to listen. Her voice shook at first, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to say. Senator Kennedy, she began, clutching a folded letter in both hands, you don't know me, but you saved my son. The room froze. Judge Judy's eyes darted toward the woman. Even Professor Blake leaned forward. The cameras instinctively panned in. He was 17, she continued, and he got caught up in a contract scam, one of those tech startups that signs kids into unpaid internships with misleading language in the fine print. Her voice cracked slightly, but she held her ground. We tried everything, legal aid, letters, appeals. No one would listen. They said we didn't understand the contract, that it was our fault for not reading carefully. But your name kept coming up in this community newsletter, something about a bill you passed that added protection for underage workers and predatory clauses. It gave us the standing to sue. We won. She wiped her eyes. That clause, the one she just laughed at, that clause gave my son his future back. Gasps moved like waves through the studio. It wasn't just a moment. It was a reckoning. John Kennedy stood silent, humbled. He didn't respond with a speech. He just nodded deeply, as if the gesture itself held more than any words could. The woman stepped forward slowly and handed him the letter. He accepted it with both hands. It wasn't ceremonial. It was sacred. And then came the fourth twist, because a member of Judge Judy's own legal staff, seated quietly offstage, stood up and cleared his throat. If I may, he said, voice trembling but sincere. I just want to say, I was one of the clerks who recommended that clause be used in our scripts. A hush fell again. He looked at Judy, almost apologetically. We knew it was one of the cleanest, most protective clauses in modern legislative history. We just didn't know it was him. His eyes turned to Kennedy. I'm sorry, sir. We should have known. We should have done our homework. Judge Judy's expression shifted, this time from embarrassment to something deeper. Regret. Maybe even shame. She had spent her career commanding courtrooms, shutting down arrogance, and enforcing consequences. But today, she had become the cautionary tale. And it was happening live. The producers didn't cut. They didn't even blink. They let it roll. And for good reason. What was happening wasn't just entertainment. It was a masterclass in humility. A man the world assumed would be rattled by public humiliation had just turned a national audience into a classroom of empathy, law, and quiet power. And then Kennedy finally spoke. His voice was softer now, stripped of pretense. "I didn't come here to prove anything," he said. "I agreed to participate in this segment because I believe in public education, because I think Americans deserve to understand the laws that govern them. Not through fear or ridicule, but through context, through care." He paused, letting the words sink in. What happened today wasn't a mistake. It was a mirror. And sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is look into that mirror and ask ourselves, am I still listening? Or have I just been waiting to speak? The audience didn't clap. Not right away, because the moment didn't ask for it. It asked for reflection, for pause. Even Judy looked moved, her posture softened, her eyes wet but holding back. And then, like a storm finally releasing its rain, the room erupted. Not with roars, but with a standing ovation that felt earned, personal, and alive. People weren't just applauding a man, they were applauding a truth too often silenced. That dignity, when paired with knowledge, is unshakable. That real strength doesn't shout. It endures. As the show began to fade to credits, a camera zoomed in on the folded letter still clutched in Kennedy's hand. The screen dimmed to black, and one final message appeared in white letters. What would you do if the person everyone mocked turned out to be the one who protected you all along? If you felt something shift in your chest today, if this story made you see the power of humility, of listening, of legacy, go ahead and like this video and comment 9 below. Because sometimes a courtroom isn't just about the law. It's about what the law reveals in all of us. Backstage, long after the cameras stopped rolling and the crew began quietly packing up cables and light rigs, John Kennedy sat alone in the hallway, the folded letter still resting in his lap like a piece of living memory. The world outside was buzzing. Clips of the courtroom exchange had already flooded every major social platform, news anchors scrambling for statements, and hashtags like "For Kennedy silences Judy" and "High humility wins" trending worldwide. But he wasn't thinking about that. Not really. His mind was still on the woman who had stood up. The tremble in her voice. The courage in her eyes. That was the moment everything shifted. Not just in the studio, but in the hearts of everyone watching. The hallway door creaked open, and to everyone's surprise, it was Judge Judy who stepped inside. No entourage, no cameras, just her. She looked smaller than she did on television. Not physically, but emotionally, like someone who had walked through a fire and came out scorched but standing. She stopped a few feet away, her voice lower than usual. "Senator, do you have a minute?" Kennedy looked up, nodded once, and gestured to the chair beside him. She sat down in silence. For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of what had unfolded between them didn't need narration. It was already written across headlines, etched into public reaction. Finally, she broke the silence. "You didn't humiliate me," she said, eyes fixed on the ground. "I did that to myself." Kennedy didn't jump in to correct her. He just listened. "I've built a career on sharpness," she continued, "on not letting people get away with anything. But today, I didn't just miss the mark. I attacked the wrong man for the wrong reasons." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, the woman who millions knew for her iron resolve let that wall fall just enough to let the truth slip through. Kennedy finally spoke, his tone warm but grounded. "People assume wisdom gets louder with age," he said, "but sometimes it just gets quieter. It knows when to pause, when to listen." He turned to face her. That's all I ever hoped would happen today. That somewhere in all the noise, someone would listen. She looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her softened, as if the armor she'd worn for decades suddenly didn't feel necessary. You could have destroyed me, she whispered, right there on stage. But you didn't. Kennedy shrugged gently. What would that have taught the audience? That pride wins? That shouting matches are how we prove we're right? There was a long silence. Then she said, almost to herself, I forgot the law was about people. I made it about performance. He nodded. You're not alone in that. And just as the conversation settled into mutual respect, Kennedy reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I was saving this for after the episode, he said, handing it to her. It's a formal invitation. I'm holding a town hall series across 5 states, bringing real conversations about law and fairness to schools and communities that feel forgotten. I think people would listen to you if you speak from the version of yourself I just met. She hesitated, then opened the envelope. The printed invite read, Truth in Practice, a national conversation on justice and listening. She stared at it for a long moment, then folded it slowly and slid it into her purse. I'll think about it, she said quietly. That moment, unseen by cameras, felt even more powerful than everything that had played out on stage. 2 giants of vastly different worlds, courtroom television and federal law, had collided, clashed, and now quietly found a strange kind of peace. Outside, a crowd had already gathered. Students, former interns, law professors, and ordinary people who had seen the live stream or read the headlines. They weren't there for autographs. They were there because something had changed, something real. A college student approached Kennedy as he exited, eyes wide with awe. Senator, he said, I just changed my major to political science, because of what you did today. Kennedy smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. Don't do it for the headlines, he said. Do it so the next time someone's being silenced, you know how to help them be heard. And as he walked down those steps into the early evening light, the crowd parted not like fans, but like fellow travelers, minds awakened, hearts stirred. The man they underestimated had reminded a nation what it means to be powerful without ever raising your voice. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something larger, something deeper. Because what John Kennedy didn't know yet was that the footage from today wouldn't just go viral. It would be played in classrooms, quoted in lectures. And most of all, it would become a moment people pointed to when asked, what does dignity really look like? You think the story's peaked? Just wait. Because what happened 1 week later would make everything you just saw look like the calm before the storm. 1 week later, the world hadn't just moved on. It had locked in. The Kennedy-Judy courtroom moment had become more than a trending video. It was a mirror. It was replayed in classrooms, dissected on morning shows, turned into motivational clips by life coaches and legal influencers alike. TikTok edits layered Kennedy's quiet composure with orchestral swells and black and white filters. But what nobody saw coming was how far the ripples would reach. It started with a phone call. Kennedy had just finished addressing a group of high school students in rural Arkansas when his assistant handed him the phone, her eyes wide. "You're not going to believe who this is," she whispered. On the other end, a familiar voice said, "Senator Kennedy, it's Oprah." And for a moment, even he had to sit down. She didn't waste time. "I saw what happened," Oprah said. "And I've seen a lot of moments in my life, but that was different. That wasn't a man defending himself. That was a man holding space for all of us to do better." She paused. "I want to invite you to Super Soul Sunday, but I don't just want to interview you. I want you to lead the conversation." Kennedy, always modest, chuckled softly. You sure the world needs more of my drawl on cable? Oprah laughed. The world doesn't need noise, Senator. It needs stillness. And right now, you're that stillness. The episode was filmed 3 days later. A serene outdoor set, 2 chairs beneath a massive oak tree, sunlight slipping through the leaves like it had been choreographed by angels. Oprah sat across from Kennedy, holding a note card she barely glanced at. Tell me, she began, what were you really thinking? That moment when Judge Judy looked you in the eye and tried to reduce your years of service to a punchline? Kennedy leaned back, thoughtful. I was thinking, he said slowly, about every kid who's been shut down by someone louder, every elderly person dismissed as outdated, every parent told their voice didn't matter. I wasn't angry. I was responsible. I knew that moment wasn't just about me. It was about all of them. The interview spread like wildfire. But it wasn't just his words that struck people. It was his posture. The way he sat with humility, like a man who knew the spotlight wasn't a reward, but a responsibility. Schools began asking for copies of the episode. Libraries posted excerpts. Law students referenced the exchange in debates and essays titled The Power of Presence Over Performance. But the real storm hit when Judge Judy made her own appearance on a different talk show. She didn't come to defend herself. She came to tell the truth. I've spent decades silencing foolishness in my courtroom, she said, but that day I silenced wisdom, and the irony is he never raised his voice once. Her voice trembled slightly as she added, that moment taught me that intelligence without humility is just noise, and I'm thankful Senator Kennedy reminded me, and the world, of that truth. The audience gave her a standing ovation, not for her showmanship, but for her growth. It was, perhaps, the first time in her career she'd been so publicly vulnerable. And the public responded. Then came the letters. Thousands, some handwritten, some typed with shaky fingers, from students, from veterans, from single moms, from ex-convicts trying to study law, all of them saying the same thing. Thank you. But it was one letter that Kennedy carried with him from then on. It came from a 12-year-old boy in Milwaukee. The letter read, Dear Senator Kennedy, I stutter sometimes and kids laugh at me when I try to explain things. But I saw your video. You didn't yell. You just waited. You were calm and strong. Now when someone talks over me, I think about you. And I keep going. I hope I can be like you one day. Sincerely, Kevin Kennedy kept that letter folded in his wallet, right next to his Senate ID. One reminded him of his title. The other reminded him why it mattered. And just when the dust seemed to settle, a National Educational Foundation announced it was naming a new public speaking scholarship after him. The John Kennedy Dignity in Discourse Award, designed for students who demonstrated not only critical thinking, but composure, empathy, and the ability to speak truth with calm resolve. What started as a moment of humiliation was now a blueprint for how to carry ourselves when challenged. It had become more than viral. It had become valuable. And yet, one final moment was still waiting to unfold. Because on the very same day the scholarship was announced, John Kennedy received an unexpected invitation. This time it wasn't from a talk show. It wasn't from a school or a press outlet. It was from Judge Judy herself. The envelope was handwritten. Inside was a single card. No cameras, no headlines, just 5 words that would change everything again. Will you share a stage? And you won't believe what he said next. He stared at the card for a long time, longer than he expected. 5 words. Quiet, weighty, human. Will you share a stage? It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a PR move. It was a question from someone who had finally realized that sometimes the best way to rebuild a voice is to hand the microphone to someone else. Senator John Kennedy showed up to the auditorium 3 days later with no entourage, no camera crew, no press release. Just a dark blue suit, a folder under one arm, and that signature quiet resolve that had now become his trademark. Judge Judy was already waiting backstage, a shadow of the towering figure she'd once projected. She stood when he entered, extended a hand, but there was more in her eyes: uncertainty, humility, and something close to gratitude. The lights dimmed. The crowd of over 2,000 people hushed. This wasn't a political rally. It wasn't a TV spectacle. It felt more like a national reckoning. 2 podiums stood side by side, but only one microphone. Without hesitation, Judy stepped back, looked at Kennedy, and gestured toward the mic. The audience caught its breath. But Kennedy didn't walk forward. Instead, he walked over to her podium, lifted her microphone gently, and carried it over to his side. Then he extended it back toward her, a symbolic reset. No rivalry, no dominance, just mutual respect. The crowd erupted in applause, not because anyone had won, but because everyone had just witnessed something rare: dignity in real time. When Judy finally spoke, her voice cracked. "The last time we shared a room, I thought I had the upper hand. I thought wit and volume would always win. But today, I know better. Because today, I want to listen." She turned to Kennedy. "Will you tell them what you told me backstage? About the lesson that changed you, too?" Kennedy stepped forward, adjusted the mic, and nodded. "We talk a lot in this country about teaching others a lesson. But the most powerful lessons are the ones we receive. That moment in court, yeah, it stung. But I realized something afterward. I realized how quick we are to label people based on one loud moment, one comment, one mistake, and I don't want to be a part of that anymore." He scanned the audience. "So I'm not here to gloat. I'm not here to get the last word. I'm here to say thank you, because this moment, this conversation, is more important than any verdict." Then something unexpected happened. One by one, people in the audience started standing up. No cue, no music, just the quiet rise of strangers moved by something bigger than ego. Teachers, nurses, college students, even a few kids. All rising, not for a celebrity, but for a standard. For the rare sight of 2 adults doing what millions quietly wished more public figures would do: own their flaws, listen harder, and meet in the middle. Judge Judy placed her hand on Kennedy's arm. "You taught me that silence isn't weakness," she said. "It's strength under control." Later that night, the clip of that handshake, the real one, not the courtroom sarcasm, went viral again. But this time, it wasn't funny. It wasn't dramatic. It was hopeful. Comment sections filled with words like dignity, healing, "This gives me hope for my kids." And the final twist? A movement began. A grassroots campaign across schools, social media, and workplaces. They called it the Kennedy Pause. A new idea. Before reacting with anger, take a pause. A moment to breathe, to reflect, to choose your response instead of being owned by it. Kennedy never asked for the spotlight. But because he handled humiliation with grace, the world handed him something greater than fame. It handed him trust. So now we ask you, watching from your phone, your laptop, your couch, what would happen if you paused before judgment? If you met arrogance with calm? If you chose dignity, even when it's hardest? Drop a comment below and tell us, do you believe respect can go viral? If you've ever wished the world had more grace, type 9 in the comments. Let's make this conversation louder than any insult,